Hi, we're back at it. And this is, I think I might have got my numbering wrong before. We had finished the fourth program for Rule 14, and actually now we're beginning not Rule 14.5, we're beginning 15.1. It is the last of the rules, and we did 17 pages actually of these document pages in the last grouping. So now we're at the very final rule in the Treatise on White Magic. We have about 35 pages left of the document, and we have maybe, 40 pages remaining from the actual book, the 15th rule. Okay. So here we have the precipitation of the preferred thought form with its etheric sheath as well. And it encounters, I think, the ancient fires. The fires approach the shadow, yet burn it not. That implies that the etheric sheath is part of that which must precipitate. The fire sheath is completed. Let the magician chant the words that blend fire and water, and we'll have to see how DK looks at those two terms. Sometimes water is simply matter, and we'll have to see whether it is whether he means the astral plane or whether there's something else involved, a different meaning of the term. So the subjects to be taken up: the esoteric sense, the negation of the great illusion, then a call for service, and the New Age groups and training. So I think the last two subjects will be of a more general nature and have much to do with how we can serve at the present time. So now the first of our subjects is the esoteric sense. Generally, it's been called the seventh sense because the sixth sense is the common sense, combining the other and more familiar five. We come now to the consideration of the last rule for magic. As we cast our minds back over this long series of instructions, certain basic lines of teaching stand out with exceptional clarity, casting lesser lines into the shade. Students would do well to remember that in the reading of any basic textbook, and this one is so regarded, note the word basic, even though we consider it in some senses quite intricate, a definite procedure should be adopted. The student should first of all read the textbook as a whole in order to grasp its outstanding points, its main lines of teaching, and the 3 or 4 propositions upon which the entire structure is founded. That's the first. Okay, so next, having grasped these, he can then begin to deal with and to isolate those subsidiary points which serve to elucidate and clarify the main essentials. Okay, this is second. And after that, he can successfully deal with the details. Okay. Students, therefore, would find it of interest to review these instructions and gather out of them the major points. Then they can proceed to fill in the secondary teachings and finally arrange the detailed data under the various heads which have emerged. I think I can see how work in the new esoteric schools may well proceed. This, when completed, would constitute a synopsis of the book and would fix the knowledge it contains firmly in the student's memory, and that, of course, is necessary. We're all going to retain something as we read a book like this, but Master DK is asking for maybe a more systematic approach. I found, well, I guess I've been studying the Bailey books now for about 47 years. And I find, that many things have stuck in my memory, but had I been maybe even more systematic, as DK is suggesting here, there would have been a still firmer structure. I guess the major points are contained in the rules themselves. In the subsidiary topics, like the ones outlined here in blue, we have the secondary teachings: esoteric sense, negation of the great illusion, call to service, New Age groups, and so forth. And then under each one of those, we have a number of details. So in a way, he has outlined for us the approach he is asking us to take. One of the main teachings which can be seen most clearly in all instructions of a truly esoteric character concerns the attitude of the student of the occult. Is it a noun? Is it an adjective? He is supposed to be dealing with things subjective and esoteric. He aims to be a worker in white magic, as indeed all the masters are, whether they are specifically along the third or the seventh ray line. As such, he must assume and consistently hold the position of the observer, detached from the mechanism of observation and contact. So, we are behind the mechanism. The identity which we discover ourselves to be is behind and within the instrument, the mechanism of observation. He must recognize himself as, and this is so important, and it requires some degree of reminding, he must recognize himself as essentially a spiritual entity. So many people fail right there. They consider themselves to be a biological entity, and that consciousness is not primary but secondary and derived from the biological interactions of this organic instrument. So he must recognize himself as essentially a spiritual entity, different in nature, objectives, and methods of working from the body which he considers it wise to occupy temporarily and to employ. Okay, well, right there comes a major discrimination, which so many people seem incapable of making. They do not find themselves behind and within as the observer of the mechanism. They do not identify the mechanism as the mechanism. They identify it as the indispensable self without which they would not exist. He must realize his unity and lines of contact with all similar workers and thus arrive at a conscious awareness of his position in the hierarchy of beings. So find the other spiritual workers and their status or elevation and where one fits in the hierarchy of being. So much misinformation has been spread abroad. Master Moria calls these like sores, errors in books are like unhealable sores. So much misinformation has been spread abroad and so much emphasis has been unwisely laid upon status and position in the so-called hierarchy of souls, that sane and balanced disciples now seek to turn their thoughts elsewhere and to eliminate as far as may be all thought of grades and spheres of activity. Well, I think up to a point that is wise, but one must also know one's approximate standing, on this ladder and what lies before one as a possible achievement. So, yes, we have turned our thoughts away from the usual hierarchical gradation, at least some have, and those who haven't oftentimes show their limitations by insisting upon an almost human stratification. It is possible in the swing of the pendulum to swing too far in the opposite direction and to discount these stages of activity. Well, as I say, when dealing with esoteric astrology, you have to have some idea of where the person stands on the ladder of evolution, at least some idea. And when trying to determine whether certain rays have emerged, the same is the case. Do not misunderstand me, however, I do not suggest that an attempt be made to place people and to decide where they stand on the evolutionary ladder. I've seen teachers do this, Once I was in the presence of a teacher who had 49 squares in front of her, and 7 by 7, and each student was placed significantly and exactly where she thought the student belonged. It was a kind of a hierarchical arrangement, as if we really know the status of the soul before us, as if we can even see people really as souls. So there is this false kind of hierarchicalization, and it only leads to some kind of egotistical contest to increase one's status and, by the way, demean and decrease the status of others. This has been most foolishly done in the past, with much dishonor to the subject, so much so that in the minds of the public the whole matter has fallen into disrepute. Well, under Aquarius we have a great leveling going on, and the idea that some in one life, because that's all you get, may exceed others in development and unfoldment is not a popular idea. After all, the individual did not determine how he or she would turn out as a person. This is left to the forces of genealogy. What is to say? Maybe that's not the right word. Genetics is a better word. Left to biology and genetics, and the poor individual has no choice. But of course, believing as we do in reincarnation and in a kind of continual meritocracy, we don't accept the previous explanation. We do believe that we are responsible for the capacities we can manifest in any one life, and we do believe in many cyclic incarnations. That in itself would, if accepted as a hypothesis more widely, would greatly change the way that we treat each other and regard each other. Of course, people would fight against being considered younger in soul experience than others, and they would fight against the idea that somehow in the past they had missed opportunities and messed things up a bit. They would not like to accept anything that possibly demeans them. And yet, factually, as I remember Manly Hall saying or hinting, we are where we belong, and what we have achieved is exactly our responsibility and to be laid at our doorstep. If these changes are regarded sanely for what they are, states of extended consciousness and grades of responsibility, maybe that's where that correlates with Mary Bailey's idea of spheres of responsibility. And regarding regarding the idea of a hierarchy as not man-made, but essentially a meritocracy based upon one's own efforts over many cycles, then the danger of personality reaction to the terms accepted disciple, initiate, adept, master would be negligible, and much trouble would be eliminated. But, the personal response is always not far away. And we tend to want to see ourselves as the equal of all, regardless of what we have really accomplished. So there is no true sense of humility among so many. There is not a sense of proportion. And the hypothesis would have to be accepted as reasonable for the proper research to be done. I guess maybe it will be beginning soon, and indications are already there. And then maybe the whole matter of survival and even reincarnation will be accepted as much more plausible than now it is. It must ever be remembered that individual status is rigidly kept to oneself, and the point of evolution, which may be truthfully recognized as lying ahead of the average citizen, will be demonstrated by a life of active, unselfish service and by the manifestation of an illumined vision which is ahead of the racial idea. And you'll have to notice that word rigidly, because we see so many people, they may not speak very much about their status, but they hint in such a way that it is unmistakable, that what they mean is unmistakable, and you will get it. So it's not really important, except in the interplay and intercourse between the disciple and the master. There, the status can be discussed, and DK sometimes hints at it or speaks of it in a group of disciples, and always, I'm sure, being aware of reducing the possible personality reaction of the peers. That is, this factor of envy or jealousy is unfortunately rather ubiquitous, and maybe it's somehow the realization that all monads are created equal. I guess in the Declaration of Independence in the United States, we can't say all monads are created equal. You have to say all men or all human beings are created equal, and that immediately admits of misinterpretation, because on what level are we speaking? We're not even, we're created through biological processes originating in the soul, but it's really a monadic impulse, and the monads emerge from the one on a pretty egalitarian basis. They have the chance as an emanation to work out their own pilgrimage, their descent and reascent, even though essentially they are the one. So I think the Dalai Lama handles this well. A lot of veneration would come to him, and even worship, a lot of devotion and so forth. And he basically says, I am simply a monk. And that tells us something about what he is striving for, and that he doesn't want attention to his personal self, that he is striving just like everybody else. And if we all remember that, in this book I wrote on infinitization, I thought about the different kinds of levels of people in their expression. And I thought about moving farther and farther away from groups of people in kind of a abstracting motion, and how the place where they are found begins to move smaller and smaller, begin to look smaller and smaller, and the differences between them begin to coalesce, at least in the eye of vision. And before you know it, you're dealing with just a point, and all of the many differentiations which we would notice if we were closer have simply become visually superimposed. And there's a certain sameness which pervades everything, regardless of how different the strata may look if you're up closer. And I think it never hurts for us to, they call that word to prescind, to abstract oneself, the pratyahara idea, to move backwards and backwards and backwards until all differentiations merge together and become superimposed, and you just can't make distinctions anymore between what used to be the many you were observing and what now seems to be just a oneness in the smallest possible space, expressing in the smallest possible space. You can do those things with your imagination. I think Einstein did a lot with his imagination, and people have wondered, well, how did he ever come up with it? It may be true and all that, but how in the world did he arrive at his conclusions? And the imagination, as it triggered the intuition, seems to be the answer. So you can make just about anything happen in your imagination, and if it has teaching value, then do it, and see if you can develop a different perspective, one that is maybe out of the ordinary and revelatory. Sometimes when I sit down, and I see so much differentiation around me, and I'm looking for the factor of sameness in all differentiation, I have to use certain formulas, and I have to wait until suddenly sameness dawns in the midst of diversity. And I do use my imagination, and when I look at certain, let's say, certain people, the factor of sameness appears more readily than when I look at others. That's just my failing, One has to be able to look at the enemy in the relative world and still see the same without being attracted or repelled. But, it's a trick of the imagination, and it does seem to bring home certain realizations which do not come when you simply use words to try to establish this living substratum. Okay, going on. In the gathering together in the world at this time of the new group of world servers, true caution must be preserved. Well, I have the sense that the impulse for the new group of world servers was the movement of a great many ashrams onto the Buddhic plane. Not all, some have a high place on the atmic plane, not many, and some of a more scientific nature, we're told, have a place on the higher mental plane, but a great many, I think, especially on the 246 line, have moved to the Buddhic plane, and I think that's when a sort of an outer reflection of this inner hierarchical process, the new group of world servers began to appear. But usually the conventional date is more like 1932 or so, and that would be a time when this book was being written or maybe finished, being completed. In the gathering together of the new group of world servers, true caution must be preserved. Each worker is responsible for himself and his service and for no one else. It sounds so prosaic, but AAB said, basically, mind your own business. Well, different parts of the one, we are all different aspects of the one, and in a way our business is everything, but from a practical relativistic point of view, we know that we are in a way an encapsulated emanation that we are the one descended into an ever smaller scope of registration. Gosh, do I dare write that down? We are the one descended into an ever smaller scope of registration. Well, not maybe as small as an atom, although whatever we are has been there too and is there even now. Certain ideas are so unusual and so paradoxical that one sees fit to reject them almost without thinking them through. But if you do think these things through, we will find that somehow the we that we are, the one and only identity, the self-knower, is our very selves, and we are the participator in all knowing. Eventually, not now, in our state of perceptual containment. Okay, so let me put that down. We live now in a state of perceptual containment, and even the universal logos does. The only one who, and maybe who does not, is the absolute deity. It is wise to gauge and approximate the evolutionary status not upon claims made, because the claims belie the status claimed. And I think I'll, sort of put that in there. Claims belie the status claimed. One is not holding status rigidly to oneself to avoid friction, and all of the unfortunate byproducts of friction. I mean, he talked about, irritation and tumors and, the destruction of matter in the system. He talked about many unfortunate things which have their parallel in society when people are making claims about their importance and about their status and so forth. We are all like the smallest possible unit, and we are all the largest possible unit. We are all that. And meanwhile, we are under the Mahamaya in a state of perceptual containment, and this state varies from emanation to emanation. So we can approximate evolutionary status based upon work accomplished and the love and wisdom shown. How do we really? Well, it's said in the Bible, by their fruits ye shall know them. And, well, we can say, do we all judge fruits in the same way? But it becomes obvious. I mean, you look at somebody like the Dalai Lama and his worldwide movement for the advancement of the advancement and application of Buddhism. And it's a magnificent flowering forth. The fruits have come forth from his life, even though he was not sitting in the Potala Palace anymore. And there are many people, who claim to be walking in the door of Shambhala daily or asking, let's say, Sanat Kumar what they should have for breakfast. But our lives of relative insignificance that have not offered fruit that can benefit others. So the difference between what really emerges and that which is claimed. Judgment should be based upon an evident knowledge of the plan as it works out in the wise formulation of the next step ahead for the human race. We look at Franklin Roosevelt in a time of great crisis in the United States, let's say, and with his Virgo ascendant, which is allied to the worker, to the average working man. He was an Aquarius, a server with a Virgo ascendant, and he came up with this New Deal, which put many people back to work. That's Virgo again, and gave them sustenance, so much so that the selfish, financial aristocrats said of Roosevelt that he was a traitor to his class. Well, think about that class-based thinking and think about the selfishness of such a statement. So he's a man who really, complex man, but a man who really cared and a great disciple. a great first-rate disciple, says the Tibetan, and Eleanor Roosevelt too. They had their problems, and just like anybody else, but there was a certain kind of expansiveness and selflessness in how they approached, and you could judge then. The New Deal turned the United States around from its depression. Germany, in a different way, it chose to exit the depression via aggression and war at the time, anyway. So there are different ways of creating patterns to escape difficult situations, and some of them may be very positive and ingenious and constructive and unselfish, and others quite the opposite. So judgment should be based upon an evidenced knowledge of the plan as it works out in the wise formulation of the we're going to be discovering in the book, there are mistakes. There are mistakes in the AABCD-ROM. I'm sure the publishers get tired of hearing about it. I found a typo, The wise formulation of the next step ahead for the human race. Upon a manifested esoteric sense, knowing what is internally important and being able to be in touch with it, and upon an influence or auric power which is wide, constructive, and inclusive. Well, this is the way not to claim, but to judge in such a way that one can be helpful. There are medicines in the world, but you can't apply the same medicine to every disease, unless you have some kind of panacea, that works under all circumstances. But I think we don't have that kind of medicine. We have to know what needs to be done, and we have to have the means to ameliorate negative, unsatisfactory conditions. We have to care about the improvement of the world illusion. Well, why do I call it an illusion? I mean, from the absolute philosophical sense, even as the Tibetan is saying, it's all phantasmagoria, including associated persons. It's all a great dream of the self-observing universal being. But from another point of view, it is the drama, the play, the dance, It is what we're working out and what we're experiencing. And this Mahamaya, it does go on forever. And it's as if we have to create beauty, which is a reflection of the divine archetype which has been conceived in the mind of the becomer. I like it better than the creator. It's like God becomes the world. It's a kind of pantheism rather than God takes his hands. The old man with the white beard takes his hands and shapes the world. A very primitive idea, of course, but I think we do better with self-becoming than we do with creation. Because when you look at what God can be, or what the universe is, I mean, what else is there to use for material other than God itself? It's not that there is God and then something other than God. Or those ideas just are the result of the limitations of the human mind, which tends to be dualistic. But there is such a thing as cultivating the non-dualistic mind. You ask me to define more clearly what I mean by the esoteric sense. Okay, now we get right into the definitions. I mean essentially the power to live and to function subjectively. Remember, that's not subtly, it's subjectively. Okay, so let's just say that subtle functioning is different from subjective. Maybe I should put it the other way. Subjective functioning. One is the latter is rooted in the soul and above. In the soul and points of tension above the soul. When I say above, I mean more rapid in terms of its frequency. So the latter is rooted in the soul and points of tension above the soul. I mean, essentially the power to function subjectively. That's something we really learn in esotericism, that the subtle bodies are still lunar, and although the subjective bodies are subtle, increasingly subtle, they are truly subjective and have to do with the subject, and not with subtle objects such as the subtle bodies of the personality are. So, the power to live and function subjectively, to possess a constant inner contact with the soul and the world in which it is found. So the higher mental plane is not a foreign land to such a consciousness, and this must work out subjectively through love, actively shown, through wisdom, steadily outpoured, and through the capacity to include and identify oneself with all that breathes and feels, which is the outstanding characteristic of the all truly functioning sons of God. So here is, well, what can we call it? We just, subjectivity defined. Constant inner contact with the soul and even as the soul, you might say. I do, kind of make a fine point of distinction between the words with and as. With implies duality, and as goes further and suggests the identification of the subject with the object. So I prefer the word as. It's more indicative of one who has overcome the illusion of duality. So a constant inner contact as the soul and the world in which it is found. So the ability to focus on the higher mental plane, which DK in Letters on Occult Meditation says is so very important. And this must work out subjectively, through soul radiation, we might say, or through the radiation of the soul in incarnation through the personality, working out through love, actively shown. The hierarchy is a very center of active force, expressive. It's not a center of peace the way Shambhala is. There's much more of the activity aspect about it. And through wisdom steadily outpoured. So it's really showing, giving, outpouring, making available a certain quality, and let's call it just energy, to and for those who need it. And through the capacity to identify oneself as, if I may be permitted, as all that breathes and feels, which is the outstanding characteristic of all truly functioning sons of God. We have to realize that we are sons of God. In fact, that we are, as St. Paul said, know ye not that ye are gods, which means we are aspects of the one. So, I mean, therefore, an interiorly held attitude of mind which can orient itself at will in any direction. It can govern and control the emotional sensitiveness, not only of the disciple himself, but of all whom he may contact. Okay, so Okay, so the seventh sense, the esoteric, is also an attitude of mind, and a flexible one at that. So, I mean an interiorly held attitude of mind which can orient itself at will in any direction. It's not confined, and it's certainly not confined to the personality. Not confined to the personality. It can govern and control the emotional sensitiveness, but, Christ, he could calm the waters. So, therefore, not only the disciple himself, but of all whom he may contact. By the strength of his silent thoughts, he can bring light and peace to all. So, one with the esoteric sense is very effective in bringing spiritual expression to his environment. I've got to find something for the esoteric sense. ENS. No, that won't do. ESS. How about that? That'll do it. Esoteric sense. ESS. Looking for abbreviations to save time in the future. Through that mental power, he can tune in on the world thought and upon the realm of ideas, and can discriminate between and choose those mental agencies and those concepts which will enable him as a worker under the plan to influence his environment and to clothe the new ideals in that thought matter which will enable them to be more easily recognized in the world of everyday thinking and living. So he has Buddhic access, because that's where the world of ideas comes from, and he can, let's say, I guess, clothe idea and ideal appropriately and most appealingly for best effect. The attitude of mind, this attitude of mind, will enable the disciple also to orient himself to the world of souls in that high place of inspiration and of light, discover his fellow workers, communicate with them, and in union with them collaborate in the working out of divine intentions. Okay, so we have basically the esoteric sense is a particularly spiritual and flexible attitude of mind. AOM, do I have anything for that? No. Okay. And, there is much intuition in relation to it, and much skill in action. It's really going beyond the common sense of synthesizing the data which the normal senses present to consciousness. It is, very simply living the subjective life. This esoteric sense is the main need of the aspirant at this time of world history. Not to be caught in the usual states of mind and emotion, but really to function behind the scenes as the one working through the instrument, as the observer. Every day we really should, remind ourselves of who and what we are. We are behind and within, and we have to get the sense of being behind and within, and All obvious things, such as the body, they have to be identified as obvious and objective. And that has to do with the emotional field as well, the energy field, the emotional field, the lower mental field, really eventually everything. We're behind it all, but let's just begin with the most external factors, the vehicles embodied by the lunar lords. Until aspirants have somewhat grasped it and can use it, they can never form part of the new group of world servers. It's not just, I'd like to serve and how can I serve? There's some subjective requirements to be a member of the new group of world servers. So there are subjective requirements to be a member of the new group of world servers. They can never work as white magicians, and these instructions will remain for them theoretical and mainly intellectual instead of being practical and effective. So we have to find, what can I say, those, well, let's say, with the esoteric sense, one must find one's inner esoteric nature, and not just intellectually and theoretically, but factually, and actually, feel this position, this state of the observer. Look in the mirror and realize that really you're looking at a vehicle, and find something different, more interior, which seems to be to you more yourself than the objective form that's in the mirror. Assure yourself that it is simply an external instrument, however useful, and find the reality, the felt, the sense, the experienced reality of this other something, this recessed something. So to cultivate the inner esoteric sense, meditation is needed, and continuous meditation in the early stages of development. Maybe later, as it is said, your whole life becomes an uninterrupted meditation. But as time elapses and a man, as time elapses and a man grows spiritually, this daily meditation will perforce give way to a steady spiritual orientation, and then meditation is now understood and needed will no longer be required. Well, let's not assume that we have reached that point. It's like vegetarianism. It doesn't mean that the person who understands the relative use of vegetarianism and finds himself more advanced on the path suddenly drops it and becomes a kind of rabid meat eater. It's not that. So meditation is always useful, and I think it's Master KH, is it HPB writing, is it KH? Anyway, saying meditation is our holiday. You vacate the usual on a holiday, and you go to a place, a state, which has more congenial atmosphere and which is uplifting and perhaps relaxing, restorative for the masters, at least I think in the words of KH, if not HPV's words, that meditation is their holiday. The detachment between a man and his usable forms will be so complete that he will live ever in the seat of the observer, and from that point and attitude will direct the activities of the mind and of the emotions and of the energies which make physical expression possible and useful, that is, etheric and physical states of energy. Well, this is so good, it's going to be something I really want to blow up. Just, for the sake of impression. So all of us, we have to learn how to detach from our usable forms. Find ourselves more convincingly within than we seem to be without. And, just spend a minute or two every day reminding yourself of this. And Dr. Assagioli, he had the idea, he said, do this Raja Yoga technique. I have a body, but I am not the body. I have vital states, but I am not those states of vitality. I have the emotions and desires, but I'm not them. I have many thoughts in the mind, but I'm not the mind and those thoughts. What then am I? I am the soul am I, something of that nature. Every day, he said, it should be a cleansing, a prophylaxis, a cleansing every day to remind ourselves of our true inner identity. As long as we are embroiled and enmeshed in the scene before our eyes, we have become entangled. There's that old story about the tar baby, Every time you hit the tar baby to try to get out, you get more stuck. So only through pratyahara, only through abstraction, only through prescinding can we pull back sufficiently to find ourselves and know ourselves really as the observer and the being which observes. It's not just finding oneself as consciousness, it's finding that there is actually an entity which antedates consciousness. So, living ever in the seat of the observer. It's something that we can practice at any moment. Who am I in the midst of distressing circumstances, in the midst of emotional reactivity or great fatigue or mental confusion? Who am I in the midst of all of those turbulent lower states which have not been brought into a state of balance? Can I find myself as the being who observes? We're just about at the state where I can say 1 hour has passed in program number 11, which is 15.1. Going on, the first stage in this development and culture of the esoteric sense consists in the holding of the attitude of constant, detached observation. The fifth ray is good at this. It's also a ray which has to do with the law of cleavages, and it, for better or for worse, finds it easy to separate itself from that which is observed. Of course, if you get into the quantum physics, the idea is that the observer cannot really separate himself from that which is observed, that the observation is part of the state of that which is observed. And maybe at the micro level, that is so, but we're talking about, kind of a practical level here. Eventually we do have to reclaim our identification with all that is observed. First we separate ourselves and then we rejoin, but we cannot rejoin in the right way until we've truly separated the observing self from that which is observed. Subject-object dualism, it's a practical phase in the observational process, and it helps later with re-identification because it is not a permanent state. Anyone who thinks that dualism is a permanent condition has missed, I think, the point of the esoteric teaching, or one of the greatest precepts of the esoteric teaching. The new group of world workers, notice that. That's a different name, isn't it? So, workers, servers, note workers instead of servers, but also there's similarity because, as Master DK says, it's a very hard thing, really, to be a server, and it requires much sacrifice of time and interest. And how does one get in this state of mind where that sacrifice seems justified? The new group of world workers might be regarded in its outer ranks as a trained body of organized observers. A trained body of organized observers. It's a lot like the second seed group in a way, except that members of this group are found in all the seed groups, but those are the trained observers, and they always hold their position as a subjective reality. And they do not allow the factor of identification with objectivity, at least at first, to delude them. I would divide the group into 3 divisions, and I do so in order that aspirants and chelas all over the world may be guided in their knowledge as to where they stand individually, and may, in sincerity and truth, begin to work with intelligence. They can be thus aided to place themselves. So, without any false system of superiority and inferiority, DK is helping us analyze our position so that we can indeed take our real next step forward and not our imagined next step forward. There's so much hype and so much glamour, and some people are channeling the entire hierarchy, you know that. And it just rings so false. But the followers lacking discrimination and not understanding that their leader is Bucyrus or Abucyrus just eat it up and think that it's all true. If someone channels Master Moria, Christ, and even Sanat Kumara, and even the planetary logos, it is accepted because the sense of proportion is so distorted. And notice he says all over the world. This is a hint about how his books are distributed. He said, my books have a much wider readership than you can imagine. And now in these days of the internet, when they are instantly available in completeness, I guess they really are spread all over the world. And when they are rightly translated, a difficult thing to do. Some people have virtually given their whole life to doing this with accuracy. 30 years, maybe 40 years of translating the Tibetans' books into the language of their country, and other people come along and use Google Translator and look at the translating of these books wrongly as a piece of cake for which they will be recognized. Well, when we rush into action and have a lot of misunderstanding about how we will act and why we will act that way, the result cannot be good. So we're going to try to place ourselves. The first group is the group of organized observers. Okay. These aspirants. Now, why do we say aspirants? Is there a reason? Is he being technical here? These aspirants are learning to do two things. They are learning to practice that detachment which will enable them to live as souls in the world of daily affairs. The soul in incarnation, the soul behind and within all incarnational phenomena, which will enable them to live as souls in the world of daily affairs and understand the real significance of the words to work without attachment. Little Mr. Freud getting in there. To work without attachment. The real meaning of it, as they stand back. So the first thing they do, these organized observers, is they practice detachment, thus eventually learning to work without attachment. They are also, secondly, let's see here, those students of world affairs in one or other of the 7 departments earlier referred to when I brought the new group to the attention of the world. So they're working along a particular ashramic line. They are studying the signs of the times. They investigate the great drama of history in order to discover its main trend, and so express to the ordinary academic world and to the thinkers of the race what they see and understand. So, firstly and secondly, So the ability to look backward, the ability to look at history and see the emergence of trends, of great ideas colored by the 7 rays. We might call this looking for the emerging pattern of the divine plan by examining history. So the researcher of the past, is that what it can be called? Running, and notice this, this is what's interesting. All of history seen as a great drama. Well, there have been many dramatic incidents, even in the history that we know something about. But this is DK's assessment of the phantasmagoria of what we call history, and how to see it from many different points of view. What is the correct point of view? Maybe only the all-seeing eye can understand what really happened. The rest of us are biased by our limitation, our perceptual limitations. Running through all human history is a triple thread, and in the interplay of these 3 threads, the story of evolution is to be found. Okay, so here's the historical perspective, and we have to be very grateful to Madame Blavatsky for giving us the planetary history, or at least the history of man, and in a way the sort of the history of the birth of our planet and its relation to a comet. Comets, from this esoteric perspective, are bodies which settle down into orbit and become planets. So, one thread guides the thoughts of men as he deals with the development of the form aspect, with the racial trends, and it shows how undeviatingly the forms of races, of countries, and of the fauna and flora of our planetary life have kept pace with the needs of the slowly emerging sons of God. All right, so now we're looking at 3 threads. The nature of the 3 threads. So, one thread guides the thoughts of men as he deals with the development of the form aspect. Races, trends, how the plant life and the animal life changes to meet the need of the emerging sons of God. I guess if we were walking in some sort of, what can we call it, carboniferous forest in ancient times when dinosaurs freely roamed, we'd see, a very different flora and fauna. I think, when DK says there are no true first-ray animals or completely first-ray animals, he's talking about the disappearance of certain of the dinosaurs, which really were on the first ray so destructive, they were. It's amazing, that just a couple of 100 years ago, or a little more, people didn't have any notion of these great lizards. They lived a life in which the presence of such animals just was not considered, and then discoveries came. Well, we're told there will be more discoveries, and the whole geological review will have to be reformulated. according and the chronology of the emergence of certain animal groups and man and all of that will have to be rethought. So the second thread, okay, here's one thread. Okay, one thread. All right. The second thread, I just want to separate these out just a little. All right. Sorry for the slight delay here. So form was first. Now the second thread leads us to an understanding of the growth of consciousness. One can almost predict, the direction in which he is heading, and indicates the emergence from the instinctual stage into that of intellectual awareness. We have the book From Intellect to Intuition, but we also have to fathom the movement from instinct to intellect, and on to that intuitional illumination, which is the present goal of consciousness. Okay, the second thread. Now let's make sure we know what these threads really are. Running through all human history is a triple thread. So I just want to kind of have that marked and remember what we're talking about here, because it is easy to read down and get immersed in the details and therefore forget. Okay, so now the evolution of consciousness is the next thread. And, you study the emergence of the history of ideas. I'd love to do that esoterically. They do have courses in universities about these things, and you can always put an esoteric interpretation upon it. If you know the substructure in terms of rays and astrology and cycles and so forth, but taught by someone who really knows esoteric history. And I have run into some people who have that ability, an individual who teaches history and is also an esotericist, so an ideal combination. And the third thread concerns the plan itself, and here we enter into the realm of the unknown. Well, on the atomic plane, the plan is somewhat known by the members of the hierarchy who actually know it. Okay, but for people of ourselves, we're lucky if we can get one small part of the plan in our consciousness and carry out one small part, which suits us according to our rays and astrological makeup and our level of evolution, what we can undertake successfully and what might be quixotic if we tried to do it. We have to be practical. I think this is just a little too big. Maybe. I think I'll just, it leaps ahead, it leaps. And if I want, I could get any number in there, but that would take time. Second thread, third thread, and the first thread. So Okay, and one down. That's it. Maybe I'll put a color in there that not use much. I'll do that. Pretty good there. Okay. And here we enter the realm of the truly unknown. How much of the divine plan do we really know? We know that each of the ashrams has an important part to play at differently timed intervals. We know that light, love, and power and the ability of humanity to work out the plan are all part of the plan. We know that the qualities of the Aquarian age are meant to manifest over the next 2,500 years, let's say, rounding off that cycle, or even 25,000 years when we talk about a greater age of Aquarius. We know some things. We know that the personality ray of our planet is the third, and hence all the activity and the manipulation and the confusion and the many, many forms and the difficulty creating unity. But we know the soul ray is the second, and that the unitive soul ray of our planet must emerge, and it's not yet time, I think, for the first ray monad of our planet to emerge. We know some of these things based on energies, and in a large way, our planet is to become a great station of light. We should know something about the fact that our planet is a base of the spine center within the solar system of our solar logos. What are the functions there? Well, to produce Kundalini, to help keep the life in form, just as it does for a human being. We know there's a great deal of will coming from our planet, just as the base of the spine center produces will, in contrast to the purpose of the head center. So taking those larger planetary, systemic, and cosmic hints, we can, perhaps think of some things that are part of the divine plan. Something about that great station of light, though, is very important. I think also maybe our planet is kind of a planetary hospital, is taking much of the energy force from the previous solar system and attempting to transmute it, transform it, so that it becomes aligned with the second ray quality of our solar logos. So we have a redemptive task before us. We can assemble those things from larger spheres of activity and apply them to the planet itself. And if applied to the planet, it's going to be applied to the divine plan of the planet, plan and planet. But anyway, as far as the deeper questions go, that which is in the mind of Sanat Kumara, or the planetary logos, maybe the term or the phrase realm of the truly unknown really is accurate. What the plan is and what the goal is, and what the goal is as yet totally unrealized, except by the highest adept. Do we mean an initiate of the 7th degree, or do we mean 8th or 9th degree? By the highest adept and the most exalted of the sons of God, because there are orders of life which go beyond the possible attainment of members of the 4th creative hierarchy. The solar angels have surpassed what man can do in this solar system and are members of the council within the sun. Those solar Petries, members of the council within the sun, that's more than any member of the 4th creative hierarchy of human monads can achieve at this time. So unknown except by very high lives, until the illumined mind and the power of intuitional response are developed in the human family, it is not possible for us to grasp the basic concepts which are to be found in the mind of God himself. And we better go on to the cosmic planes there to find the true mind of God, both his higher mind and his ordinary cosmic concrete mind, which can't be very concrete, at least in our terms. Until the highest point of the mount of initiation has been climbed, is at the 9th initiation, it is not possible to vision the promised land as it is. And what are the promised land here? Perhaps the cosmic astral plane or cosmic mental plane. Two great sons of God have come en rapport, at the least, with these centers, at least in modern times. The Buddha for the cosmic mental plane and the Christ for the cosmic astral plane. Is this the promised land, until the necessary limitations of the three worlds have been surmounted, and man can, with mastership, or through mastership, because the master is the master of the lower three worlds, and man can function as a free soul in the spiritual kingdom. We might say here, 4th initiation. That which lies beyond that kingdom must remain hid to man, just as much as the human state of being and awareness remains a sealed book to the animal. This is a salutary and needed lesson which all disciples should grasp. So he's basically telling us, in summary here, that our knowledge of the divine plan is indeed limited. The realm of the truly unknown. We have hints, we understand general principles, but very high adepts begin to understand something of the plan of Sanat Kumara, and maybe perhaps one must be a member of Shambhala to really grasp the plan close to the manner in which Sanat Kumara planetary logos has conceived it, all in response to the solar logos, who responds to the local cosmic logos, the seven solar systems of which ours is one. So we do have limitation in the scope of our vision. And, I remember one moment back in university days when a certain person who seemed to like to hold court, was pointed out as a kind of a know-it-all. Well, I think he was very intelligent in a third-rate sense, and it kind of reminded me of Dr. Samuel Johnson, who, gathered at a certain tavern or eating place and basically held intellectual court there. But I just thought, if we could only realize how much there is to know and how minuscule is the knowing of this tiny atom we call the human being, a much different attitude, devoid of egotism, would arise. As a learned person, a know-it-all, what a presumption, one can develop a fairly egotistical attitude, but it's all based on illusion and a misapprehension of how tiny man really is and how vast is the collection of facts that can be known by the higher beings. So, threads, thread of form, the thread of consciousness, and I suppose this last one is more of a first ray thread. The divine plan, knowledge of the divine plan is involved. So what is said here, let's see if I have that correctly. Right. Well, these three threads run through what? I think I'll just put this here and I'll look for the next one. Three threads. Here it is. Okay. Running through all human history is a triple thread. So that's how it's done. A triple thread. And in the interplay of these three threads, the story of evolution is to be found. Form, consciousness, and the divine plan. And we're told if we really want to understand what the will is, we should study these great arrangements and the emergence of the plan in history. Then something about the divine purpose will be known and revealed to us. Okay, triple thread. And what I want to do is make it perhaps just a little different color so it stands out. Okay, and the interplay of these three threads, through them the story of evolution is to be found. Now, in our universities now, we somehow study the evolution of form. We do something we call comparative form, comparative anatomy. We don't study yet something we might call comparative consciousness. But in the esoteric work, we do have a study of comparative consciousness and the limitations and possibilities of every stage. Okay. But observers of times and seasons can make rapid progress in intuitional growth. Now, who are these observers of times and seasons? The astrologers, the cyclists, not bicyclists, but cyclists, can make rapid progress in intuitional growth if they persevere in their meditation, train their intellects and endeavor always to think in universals. Yeah. So we want to, really go into that next arena of possibility, which is ruled by the intuition. Have we taken Manas just about as far as it can go as a human being? Because, certainly the Manas of a planetary logos or a solar logos can go much further. But have we taken, is our next frontier the intuitional frontier? So persevere, continue to meditate. Don't say, oh yeah, I did that. I already went to school. I don't have to go to school again. Train our intellects, really think sharply, and then think in terms of universals. That should be easier and easier as Aquarius comes in, because Aquarius is the sign of universality. So we think of things that are true everywhere and at all times. And we think in large aggregates rather than only the small item. We think of classes of entities, of that which reveals the great movements in our local cosmosphere. I mean, I don't think we can extend our thought to the edges of the universe, even if we really knew what that was. I think sometimes the edge of the universe is the edge of self-conscious observation. Beyond the scope of self-observation, there really is nothing. And we can't talk about, well, what about the space beyond that, So the boundary is the scope of universal logoic self-observation. The boundary of the universe is the uncaused irreducibility. No, the boundary of the universe is the scope of universal logoic self-observation. Okay. So we're talking about, and DK would have us make rapid progress, of course. We have to organize for speed without rushing. Let them look at the historical retrospect as part of the emerging preparation, which will inaugurate the future. The future always being based upon usually being based upon the trends of the past. Sometimes there is simply an intervention which was not given in the past, which helps to determine the future. Let them take heart of grace. Interesting sort of Christian phrase, as they recognize the fact that the kingdom of souls is steadily becoming a physical plane phenomenon. Do I speak paradoxically? And will be known eventually as a kingdom of nature. It is already a kingdom, and considered so by the scientists before 2 centuries have passed away. Well, we have about another century, don't we? So, one century or so remains. These organized observers form the outer circle of the new group, and their keynote is synthesis, the elimination of non-essentials, and the organizing of human knowledge. Very important. Okay, the different categories within the new group of world servers, and this is the outer group. To which do we belong? Probably this one. These organized observers form the outer circle of the new group, and their keynote is synthesis, to see all things as in a wholeness, not necessarily all things as identical, maybe that's another step. The elimination of non-essentials, and humanity today is so preoccupied with non-essentials. Turn on the TV, and the non-essentials will drive you crazy. And the organizing of human knowledge. So the keynote of the organized observers. Working in the many fields of human awareness, they are distinguished by a non-sectarian spirit, certainly not by any kind of recrudescent nationalism such as we find on the world stage at this time. They are distinguished by a non-sectarian spirit and by an ability to deal with foundational essentials and to link up varying departments of human investigation into one organized and human or unified whole. They do see relations accurately and are affected by pure reason of the Buddhic plane. The problem with the human mind is it sees so many things in separate, apparently unrelatable categories, and that's just an illusion. Okay. Every time it says second, I wonder where it said first, And maybe we're the organized observers. Okay. I'm looking for that word first. There are the organized observers. Well, my only solution is to make the word first even bigger. Terrible. Okay. The organized observers. Now, we have seen the three threads of which these observers are aware, and we've seen how they can progress and how they can make rapid progress, and we've seen their keynotes. The keynote, and here again, this should be blown up a bit because a word like that contains the keynote of the organized observers, the outer circle of the new group of world servers, and their keynote is synthesis, the elimination of non-essentials, and the organizing of human knowledge. I think in the Moria Federation work, which is demanding and based weekly, maybe, upon the curriculum of the future, which Master DK proposes. We can't do it all, of course. We do some of these things. We synthesize, we look at the esoteric essentials, and we do try to organize human knowledge, and especially the occult underpinnings of human knowledge. Now, this should be the second. And I'll make it big again, and I'll put it in. Whoa, that's too big. That's too big. I'll put it in purple. Second. The next group in the new group of world workers, maybe more interior, is that of the telepathic communicators. response to group vibration, and then spiritual telepathy, something like that. What has been prepared here, and this is a chart put together, there it is, by Keith Bailey of AUM Masonry, so they use that. Spiritual telepathy, there it is. So that is the borderline group, which abuts against, apparently, the cosmic ethers and leads into the realm of life and brings in the true abstract thought, and more than that, the ideas from the realm of ideas, beginning with the Buddhic plane. Okay, I've got to find this. There we go. So the telepathic communicators, they are much fewer in number and are distinguished by their relatively close interrelation with each other. They are primarily a linking or a bridging group. Well, they stand on the highest level of the mental plane. That's their focus, as that level can receive from the cosmic ethers and from the realm which the Antakarana seeks to penetrate into. They are primarily a linking or a bridging group, and they're in the middle here. This is not the same kind of listing, I think, as we find in the listing of the 10 C groups, where the telepathic communicators are listed first. Well, let's see how he organizes it. They are gathered out of the more exoteric circle of the organized observers, but have a wider scope of service than they have, for the work is more truly, they work in a more truly esoteric manner. Okay, well, maybe, we can learn to place ourselves somewhere here in a realistic, sane and realistic manner. They are in touch with each other and with the organized observers, but they are likewise in touch with the group of men and women who stand at the very center or heart of the world group. So indeed they are an intermediary and bridging group. Their work is threefold and very difficult. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so let's see, do any of us find ourselves working in connection here, or are the requirements just so high that we'll be quite happy to work with the organized observers, whatever they are called? Organized observers. Okay. Steadily, they have to cultivate that detachment which characterizes the soul, which knows itself. This is more than the soul in incarnation. Steadily, they take the knowledge and information accumulated by the organized observers and adapt it to the need of the world and give out the teaching. All right, let's just see, every time the word steadily or something like that appears, maybe we're first, and here is second. They work effectively, but always from behind the scenes, and though they may be known in the world in this early stage of the work of the new group, and though they may therefore be recognized as teachers, writers, workers, later they will recede more and more into the background and will work through the outer circle. Well, Master Decay certainly works that way, and there are maybe other high initiates that work that way from behind the scenes. There's very kind of a cult meaning to the term behind the scenes, behind the phantasmagoria, behind the events, the phenomenal events. Okay, they will they recede more into the background. They will inspire them and will place increasing responsibility upon their shoulders. They will nurture the growth of telepathic interplay in the world and thus weave those strands which will eventually bridge the present gap between the seen and the unseen, and so make the new world possible, a world in which death as we know it, because I guess there are other ways of looking at death as the suffocation of consciousness, a world in which death as we know it will be abolished and a trained universal continuity of consciousness be established. That is why the emphasis is laid in training the members of this group in the new group upon telepathic sensitivity. The members of this second circle of workers are taught to develop sensitiveness in 3 directions: to the thoughts of men in physical incarnation, to the minds of those who have passed over and who are still in mind bodies, and thirdly, to the group of spiritual beings who stand as the custodians of the evolutionary process, the masters, right? The hierarchy, and through whose hands the 3 threads of developing life steadily pass. The thread of form, of consciousness, and of the plan. So the sensitivity is here described, that they must develop. I'm not sure I succeeded in finding the third point. It began to be, very complex, and so many things were mentioned. They cultivate detachment. They take the knowledge and information accumulated by the organized observers and adapt it to the needs of the world. And then what is the next? Is it that very next factor about working from behind the scenes? I'm not sure. So many things are now listed about what they do. They work effectively, but always from behind the scenes, and though they may be known in the work in the world in this early stage of the work of the new group, and though they may therefore be recognized as teachers, writers, workers, later they will recede more and more into the background and will work through the outer circle. So they will inspire the outer circle. Maybe this is the third one. Maybe. They will inspire the outer circle, inspire them, the outer circle, and will place increasing responsibility upon their shoulders. They will nurture the growth of telepathic interplay in the world. Now we start to add all the things that they will be doing, so as to make the new world possible, a world in which death as we know it will be abolished, and there will be a trained universal continuity of consciousness established. We'll always be aware of multiple worlds, and moving from one to another will not be considered death. As DK says in his instructions, there is no death. You can't be more emphatic than that. And this is why the emphasis here is upon the training in telepathic sensitivity, and they develop sensitiveness in 3 directions: the thoughts of men in incarnation, the thoughts of men who still have mental bodies but are out of incarnation, and the thoughts of the spiritual guides. So the thoughts of men to A. So let's just say first, second, to the minds of those who have passed over, and thirdly, to the spiritual beings who are the custodians. Their task is exceedingly hard, far harder than that of the first group, and harder even than that of the last, for they lack as yet certain powers and needed experience. Their center of consciousness is the intuition and not the synthesizing intellect, and their state of awareness is wide and inclusive. Well, this is a real discriminator. Okay, so they are really intuitives, and they don't necessarily need to linger with the synthesizing intellect. Maybe they've passed through that. They therefore can suffer more than the majority, and few there are who are not at this stage too sensitive for their own comfort and too responsive to vibrations emerging from the form aspect in all the three worlds. So let's just call it sensitivity also as a liability. Their state of detachment is not yet complete, and so we cannot expect that in the first group, the state of detachment will be complete. They bridge and therefore support infinite problems and respond to world pain. There's a lot of second ray in this and the consciousness sensitivity aspect. They see, if I may so express it, too much, for theirs is not yet the privilege of visioning with clarity the goal that lies 200 years ahead. And he just said what will happen in the 200 years, the 2 centuries. Certain things about the inner worlds will just simply be known, and the idea of death will be negated. Many interior contacts will be proven. Maybe, I don't know about reincarnation. The soul has to be proven as a true center in a manner that can be scientifically accepted. They sense the present need. They are responsive to the new tide of spiritual force which is flowing in. They carry the weight of humanity on their shoulders. Well, then in that respect, the burden of the world, they are true AQ and Aquarians. Okay, Aquarians, true Aquarians. And because they are somewhat coordinated, they live in the 3 worlds, all 3 worlds at once, and this few can do. They are aware of the urgency of the present opportunity and also the apathy of the many, and for these reasons they work under terrific pressure. Well, are these high disciples and initiates? DK has started to pile up their abilities in such a manner that it's hard to name a kind of a 1, 2, 3 in terms of their capacities and their tasks. Okay, now we're just about, but sensitivity is the key. They are not so much, we might say, not so much mental workers as workers in the transcendental mind. Not so much mental workers in the abstract mind, but workers in the intuitive, transcendental mind, the intuition. Okay. So where do we place ourselves, Or are we somehow in transition? Or are we solidly in one or the other? Now, the third group within the new group of world workers, we have the externalizing hierarchy here, oriented in two directions, towards humanity and towards Shambhala. The innermost group of all is that of the members of the hierarchy itself. Okay, so we're looking at a very expanded view of the new group of world servers or the new group of world workers. I care not the least whether these liberated souls are recognized as elder brethren of the race, as masters of the wisdom, as the cloud of witnesses, as the Christ and his church, as supermen, or under any terms which the inherited tendencies of humanity or tradition may choose to call them. They themselves care less. They don't have that normal egotistical burden. The burden of the ego, lower ego, is very great. Okay, so now we have pretty much, now this is the end of the, end of the second hour, roughly, in this program. Okay, they themselves care less. I mean, there's so much nonsense spoken about the masters of the wisdom, whatever we want to call them, according to our orientation. I think, the Christians who are coming over into occultism, it's a hard sell, but looked at as the cloud of witnesses in Christ and his church, it's maybe an easier transition. And I don't know, maybe the political leaders will respond to the idea of the Superman. And, in our teaching, the elder brothers and the masters, these are terms pretty much used more than the other terms. The petty quarrels as to their personalities and names and status matter not at all. We can't help but bring our petty humanity into the arena in which we consider the higher lives. We somehow force upon these higher lives our own petty little categories. But they are the intelligent forces of the planet, which is interesting. I mean, he's not telling us that they are the energies, they are the forces. They direct the planetary process through the application of spiritual force. So they direct the process in humanity through the application of spiritual force. They express, because of their state of expanded consciousness, the mind of God. Well, as found on the cosmic physical plane, but that mind of God really originates in a higher place, but somehow they are able to catch the stream. The Buddha was certainly doing this. They embody as dragons of wisdom. That's what they really are. As dragons of wisdom. Oh, the Dow Jones, huh? No. Let's see if I can get that possibly. Dragons of wisdom. No. Okay, so DOWS. I'm going to make dragons of wisdom out of this. Okay. And maybe, what I can also do is make a singular dragon of wisdom, right? That a master is. Not yet a lion of the cosmic will. And they are lesser dragons of wisdom after all. A planetary logos is a true dragon of wisdom, but these are lesser dragons of wisdom. Okay. So whatever we want to call them. Okay. Dragon of wisdom. And so they embody the intelligence principle, which we would think of in relation to Manus and the fourth grade of hierarchy. So they embody the intelligence principle, immutable and unchanging, and through them flows the energy which we call the will of God, for lack of better understanding. They are connected with the purpose, and they are connected with the means of carrying out the purpose. Sorry. That will happen. So, these beings are representing the planetary purpose and the plan which carries out the purpose, representing. They know far more of the plan than do the two outer circles in the new group of world workers. I wonder why he's using workers here. Why use the term workers and not servers? Well, maybe this is an early book, but he probably has a good reason for it. The masters are included, and in the new group of world servers, usually the masters are not mentioned, only maybe up to the higher initiates. Excuse me. They know far more of the plan than do the two outer circles in the new group of world workers, for they see clearly just what is the next step, which planetary evolution will guide the race to take during the next 200 years. He really is speaking of those 200 years, isn't he? He has talked about a possible 300 years of delay, but it looks like a lot of work has been accomplished in the first 100 years. And so, occultism is to win the day by the beginning of the 21st, maybe I think we have to call it 22nd century. So they really have that long-range vision. And as we work with them and understand some of the thoughts that they have released to humanity, we find that our vision has become considerably lengthened, and when we propose it to others, they may wonder how in the world we can speak in such terms about that which is coming. The view of the future of the average individual is very circumscribed and involves maybe a whole lot of technology and attempts to achieve immortality by linking machines with the human mechanism. The understanding of the constitution of man is really missing. And without that understanding of the constitution of man and the next step ahead, people are a little befuddled and don't really know where it's all going. Neither do we. We don't really know where it's all going, but we have some hints that guide us. They do not occupy themselves with idle speculations as to the ultimate goal at the close of the world age, the round, I suppose. They may know the philosophical essentials, but the work involves dealing with the state of the world illusion or planetary illusion as it is. And when I use the word illusion there, I don't just mean that there's a misunderstanding. I mean that this is the Mahamaya. This is the great illusion. This is not an easily viewed ultimate reality unless we have trained ourselves to view or perceive something approximately on the way of that great reality. So they don't talk about, final things before the foundation has been built. This may surprise you in view of the many speculations of the uninitiate. This is putting some of us in our place, I think. If the shoe fits, wear it, Where is it all going? What's going to happen at the very end of time and so forth? What's going to happen when the planet becomes etheric? What's going to happen in the seventh chain and the seventh round if we get that far? These are not the things that concern them. Even the judgment day is millions of years ahead and taking place in another round. The old saying, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. And my old teacher used to always repeat that. So deal with what's on your plate and what's before you, and don't evade it by looking at too hard at more ultimate results, which will never be achieved unless the requirement of the moment is met. Okay, so they don't deal with idle speculations, impractical speculations. But so it is. They know that there is a time and a season for all things, and look ahead and comprehendingly, intuitively, and comprehending intuitively the goal for all kingdoms in the immediate future, all their united effort is bent on one thing. Well, they certainly know where it's all going, at least in general. The cultivating of the intuitional telepathic responsiveness of the communicators who bridge the gap between them and the physical world. So they are responsible for bringing the divine plan into existence, and in order to do that, or into manifestation, I should say, in order to do that, they have to cultivate the intuitional telepathic responsiveness of communicators. They are, custodians of the plan, really. The cultivating of the intuitional telepathic responsiveness of the communicators who bridge the gap between them and the physical world. They need bridges in order to get through. These latter, in their turn, seek to employ the observers, knowers, communicators, employ the observers. Employ the observers. Okay, so each rank works through the rank immediately below, and below is a relative term. But group 2 works through group 1, and group 1 appeals to group 2. Group 3 works through group 2, and group 2 appeals to group 3. Did I say it right? So 1 appeals to 2 and 2 works through 1. 2 appeals to 3 and 3 works through 2. Okay, knowers, communicators, and observers. All working in a close, if oftentimes unrealized unity, and all responsive according to their degree to the impulsion of the mind and will of the Logos, the solar deity. So this is a responsiveness even beyond that, to that which lies being, who stands beyond the planetary Logos. Okay. 3 categories: knowers, the stressed communicators, hypersensitive but without the equipment to carry out their task fully developed, and the observers who are working beyond the ordinary human mind. They're synthesizing all of the trends of knowledge and the best knowledge of the day. And they are increasingly more spiritual as we go, more interior as we go. The exterior group is the observers. The communicators may be on the outer level, some of them right now, but they will recede toward the interior. The knowers have definitely receded and are the members of the spiritual hierarchy. This is a little different way of looking at things than is presented in the Dina books. There are different categories of servers, but in this case, the hierarchy is definitely included. When we're dealing with the C groups, their particular area of service, the hierarchy is their inspiration, but they are not included. And I would say these C group types belong pretty much in the communicators category. So the communicators, telepathic communicators, that's the very first seed group. The second seed group is what's called the observers of reality. And the term organized observers maybe is a little more encompassing, organizing observers, a little more encompassing than the trained observers per se, but related. And then we have the inspiring group behind it all, the true knowers. Boy, it really wants me to update this thing, doesn't it? But if I do that, I'll totally lose my track. Okay, now this is interesting. Beyond this triple group stand the thrones, principalities, and powers with whom we need not concern ourselves. I guess we've crossed a little bit over into the Deva kingdom here, and let's just say we are dealing with higher creative hierarchies. CH. Okay, CRHS. Yes, there was a little logic to it. So we're dealing with higher creative hierarchies. We're dealing with angelic groups, and when it comes to describing thrones, principalities, and powers, is that the order? There are all these hierarchies of angels. The hierarchicalists among us love to classify the different circles or choirs of angels, but obviously these are real groups, and they are beyond even the members of the hierarchy. So, maybe we might say, can the Nirmanakayas be part of the thrones, principalities, and powers. And there are other names, which are interesting. Archangels are involved. They're archangels of a certain kind, who are not the planetary logoi. The terminology becomes confusing. And that's a whole separate study. It's just enough to know that the new group of world workers is very powerful and includes rings of workers, circles of workers who have different kind of focus, some much more external than others, and some much more interior. And when we look at thrones, principalities, and powers, we're probably going to be looking at very high workers. I think we could match this with the table of creative hierarchies, perhaps. Maybe we could, beyond man, we might, the fourth, not just kingdom, but the fourth creative hierarchy, we can find the triads and the divine builders and the divine flames. And maybe they can be equivalent to thrones, principalities, and powers. Okay, are the triads, the divine builders, and the divine flames equivalent to the thrones, principalities, and powers? Well, there's a lot of correlating work to do here, and it would be like the Tibetan to present all this in a different kind of terminology. So on the other side of these servers or world workers, on the other side of these world workers, stands humanity, torn by the disasters of the past World War. That's World War I when this was written. And there's just been quite an emphasis here on the 100th anniversary, November 11th, 2018, of the armistice. Nobody is surviving in that original form alive today as far as we know. But the photographic record is there and the films are there. And the effort to make all of that seem a very current and living process has been, I think, successful. The coloration of the old films, it looks very, very real. So there's humanity torn by the disasters of the past World War, bewildered by the social, religious, and economic pressure of the present, sensitive and responsive to the influences and energies pouring in on the new tide of the Aquarian age. This is torn and suffering humanity, unable to understand and explain, and conscious only of the longing for liberty of thought and of physical condition, snatching at every chance to gain knowledge, and so providing a fertile field wherein this new group can work. This is, he's talking here about humanity's responsiveness, humanity's responsiveness to the new group of world servers or new group of world workers, including the hierarchy. But he seems to hint that thrones, principalities, and powers do have their role to play, and you kind of wonder where the powers do not correlate with that level of the sea of fire wherein the council chamber of Shambhala might be found. I mean, there's a lot of confusion when many terms are used to mean the same thing, but we have to sort it all out and find out if it's really really so. We have seen that the objective of all inner training is to develop the esoteric sense and to unfold that inner sensitive awareness which will enable man to function not only as a son of God in physical incarnation, but as one who also possesses that continuity of consciousness which will enable him to be interiorly awake as well as exoterically active, the esoteric sense. And not only outer training, but inner training is required of us, and that's the harder part, I think, and that for which we need a subtle and purified consciousness, and we're on our way to build the foundation for the cultivation of that kind of consciousness which every member of the hierarchy possesses. This is accomplished through the developing power of the trained to be a trained observer. So in a way, this is equivalent to the second of the C groups, that of the trained observers. So he hasn't really laid all that out the way he does in Discipleship in the New Age. Just imagine having, what a stressful and wonderful situation Alice Bailey was in, to have to respond to this tremendous download of knowledge, and somehow to be there and get it into form in the days of the typewriter and then distribute it. How many of our lives have been so tremendously enriched by what Alice Bailey did in line with the Tibetan, and of course the same holds true for Blavatsky. So this is accomplished through developing the power to be a trained observer, not just a telepathic communicator, although he does seem to reverse the positions here. The observers are the organized observers, and they're on the outer circle, and somehow the telepathic communicators are the next interior group, even though in the C groups they're listed in a different order. I commend these words to all aspirants. It is persistence in the attitude of right observation that brings about detachment from form, a subsequent power to use form at will, and with the end in view of furthering hierarchical plans and consequent usefulness to humanity. So he's really, what can we say here? Okay, we don't want that. We want black, if we can find it. I don't know what happened here, but it got suddenly red. All right, so it is this persistence in right observation. So this section emphasizes the value of correct observation and correlates with the work of the organized observers, the outer group of the new group of world workers. Well, let's get that right. Let's get that right. Okay. New group world workers. NGWW, new group of world workers. Okay. Of the outer group of the new group world workers. Okay. When this power to observe has been somewhat brought about, we then have the aspirant joining the intermediate group of trained communicators, the telepathic communicators, akin to the telepathic communicators of the 10 seed groups, 10 seed groups, who stand between the aforementioned groups, the exoteric groups, and the group of spiritual workers on the subjective plane, at least on the plane of the soul or in the cosmic ethers. At this time, when this was written, yes, there had been that movement. So at least the plane of the soul, the higher mental plane, at least that. So the communicators are there, intermediate, and they suffer, as all intermediate groups do. They are the really caught by their own sensitivity and their inability to express all that they perceive. So they have yet much to develop. So, who stand between the aforementioned groups, the exoteric groups of organized observers, and the group of spiritual workers on the subjective plane. Well, of course, this group of communicators is also spiritual, but not in a still higher subjective sense, because they're not really yet focused, as is the spiritual group, at least on the higher mental plane and beyond. It is well to remember that even the members of the hierarchy profit by the opinions and advice of those disinterested disciples. They've dropped their ego and they are perceiving and observing in a way which is accurate and useful, who can be trusted to rightly recognize and interpret the need of the hour. So there is interplay between these three groups within the new group of world workers. So when this stage has been reached and the man is in constant conscious touch with the plan, and I guess that's the, let's just say, is this the true inner group? Then the true magical work can begin. We're no longer simply an aspirant to the magical art. The true work can begin. Men and women who are beginning to live as souls can undertake the magical work of the new age. Well, maybe this is the communicators, I'm not sure yet, and can inaugurate those changes and that rebuilding which will bring about the manifestation of the new heavens, or a different attitude towards the subtle world, certainly, and the new earth. What is earth? Well, it's not just the dense physical plane, it's the dense physical body of the planetary logos and of the solar logos, to which all the scriptures of the world bear eloquent testimony. But there will be transformation of relations on the outer plane, and maybe that's another way of looking at the new earth. Transformation of relations on the outer plane. So, there is this utopian vision. Interesting that it's carried on often by those with a powerful Aquarius, and interesting that the lowest of the creative hierarchies, which seems to be responsible for bringing through the manifestation of the divine idea, is ruled by Aquarius. Then they can work with forces in etheric matter, and so bring into being those physical plane creations and organizations, let's call it patterns, which will more adequately embody the life of God in the Aquarian age, which is now upon us. And to this stage, it is to this stage that rule 15 refers, and we'll just, I think the best thing to do is to look again at Rule 15 and just say it, you know. The fires approach the shadow, yet burn it not. The fire sheath is completed. Let the magician chant the words that blend the fire and water. So this refers really to bringing the divine plan into completion upon the physical plane. Well, there's never completion, but into a much greater reflection of the purposeful archetypes on the archetypal plane, which, well, there's a lot of the archetype found on the Buddhic plane, but more specifically, the two esoteric planes are the monadic and the logoic, and that's where I think the highest of the archetypes meant to be manifested on the lowest levels of the cosmic physical plane. That's where those patterns can be found up there, what a language, on the monadic and logoic plane. So then they can work with forces in etheric matter, and so bring into being those physical plane creations and organizations. And we have to say all of them patterns superior to the present patterns of relationship, which will more adequately at least, embody the life of God, the archetypes of the higher levels in the Aquarian age, which is now upon us. Maybe it hasn't begun completely free of the cross currents of the Piscean age, but it's pretty well almost clear. Maybe not quite a century to go, maybe 80 years to go, and a bit more in some cases. And it's to all this that Rule 15 refers. These words mark the consummation of the magical work and are equally true of the magical work of a solar logos, of a planetary logos. Well, Rule 15, let's look at it and let's copy it, because that's what he's referring to. Okay. I think, okay, I'll put it, why not in red? Okay. These words mark the consummation of the magical work. The inner is manifest within the outer. We have to bring heaven to earth, the highest and the lowest meet, and are equally true of the magical work of a solar logos, of a planetary logos, of an incarnating soul, or of that advanced human being who has learnt to work as a white magician under the plan of the Great White Lodge. So the rule, I just did that, didn't I? So I sometimes forget. And the rule has this Rule 15, maybe like some of the others, has multiple levels of application. It, of course, refers to the work of those who, through intellectual achievement, have learned to work as magicians, but on what is called the black side. It's amazing how the movie Star Wars, and talking about the Force and the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force, it really caught something archetypal and occult. So there are those who work with the dark side of the Force, and here it even says the black side, the extinguishing of consciousness in matter, really. So through intellectual achievement alone, they have tremendous intellect. And DK has told us the raising of the concrete mind to levels that we really cannot conceive. So it refers also, this consummating magical work, to these lords of form and hateful lust and wicked pride, something like that. Sometimes, well, he says brothers nonetheless, and of course every emanation is an aspect of the one, and if an emanation has wandered too far into the land of distances, as the phrase is used, they have to retrace their steps. Okay. So the same rules of magic hold good for both groups, though the motivating impulse differs. So they are really brothers. Okay. It's called We Are Brothers of Unique Blindness. And you kind of wonder, well, who are we and who are they? Whatever experience they have had, it's a bit like the group soul on the highest level, will be reclaimed by all of us as the one being. It's not that there's any such thing as a lasting, unique experience. I mean, who and what were you in the previous solar system, and the previous universe, and the universe before that, and the universe before that, and infinitely on? There's only one being. So the experience of any emanation belongs to the being that emanated all those emanations, and that we are. Of course, that's stretching it, but if one thinks about it, there's no experience by any apparently distinct emanation from which we are excluded, ultimately, good or bad. But with the work of the black magician, we have naught to do. He does explain it here and there, and this, he says, well, they're worse than anything you can imagine, which is probably fortunate. That which they do is powerful in transient effect, using the word transient in its cyclic sense, but these effects must in due time cease, maybe the judgment day, with respect to our planet, and be subordinated to the claims and the work of the bringers of light and life. I suppose there are just areas of the universe in which the equivalent of these lords of form work, and eventually they are cast out. And what a long road back it must be. And yet, who is participating? Is it only they, or do we somehow, as the one being, do we reclaim their experience too, and the experience of all? Individuality does not last forever, is what I'm trying to say. It's a cyclic phenomenon. The shadow stage is the dim and uncertain period which is found prior to dense and concrete manifestation. I guess we could say, is this an etheric stage? It does not here refer to the shadow as the counterpart in physical manifestation of the soul. We're not talking here about any negativity, not talking about the psychological shadow. It refers to one of the intermediate stages of the graded process. It is technically called the stage of the waxing and waning of the nebulae. That's interesting. And this stage precedes the appearance of the more stabilized and relatively static exoteric form. So indeed, it seems etheric, and then precipitating into greater immobility and stability. In the form of a solar system, this is recognized as a preliminary period and can be seen going on in the starry heavens. First, the nebulae, and then their precipitation. First, the nebulae, and then their, what should we call it, precipitation or densification. It indicates the stage wherein the great magician is only in process of carrying forward his work. The great magician. Sounds like the God of the universe, really, or the God of any system. He has not yet finally chanted those mystic words or those spiritual sounds which will produce the concretion and the tangible appearance of form. Well, I don't think he's being too specific about who the great magician is. Ultimately, it would have to be the universal logos, but that's ultimate. The great magician would ultimately be the universal logos. But the solar logos is a great magician. The cosmic logos is, the supercosmic logos is, the galactic logos is. They're all great magicians, and maybe, but we have to get a bit stellar to get these nebulae going, I think. Although even there's probably certain planets that go through a shadow stage before they become densified, if they ever do. I mean, some planets, I don't know, they're on their way to densification. Do they ever reach it? The secret doctrine refers to the three fires, and these are of ancient usage. The Vishnu Purana gives these fires exactly the same nomenclature as does HPB, who borrow the terms from the ancient scripture. Okay. Electric fire, solar fire, and fire by friction, when brought into conjunction, produce the manifested macrocosm and microcosm, and to this conjunction my earlier treatise on cosmic fire referred. So three fires come together to produce a dense manifestation. The manifested macrocosm and microcosm takes three. It takes three to work through a fourth. It takes the lower mind, the astral vehicle, and the etheric field to work through the dense physical matter. Three appear in a fourth. Maybe it takes the energies of the logoic, monadic, and atomic plane to manifest in some more tangible way on the Buddhic plane. These fires are esoterically one fire, but this fire produces, according to the witnessing consciousness itself at varying stages of evolutionary development, the effect of differentiated fiery essence. I think this is a very, there's one fire, there's one God, there's one being, and the three, there's always the point in the triangle, and the three that are emanated from it. These are some of the laws, at least of our solar system, of our universe, and you kind of wonder, will these laws prevail, and have they prevailed in other universes? This fiery essence can be known as life itself, okay, or as the self-shining light, or it can be known as the active form inherent in the one substance which underlies all phenomena. The fiery essence, well, I think of it, I think of this as pure being. From one perspective, this fiery essence is a pure being. absolute isness, that than which there is no other, it's so ultimate, there can be no cause. It's the cause only of itself. It's not the cause of itself. It's just always was. And that's pretty hard when we think in terms of time and causality. It's hard to think of this ultimate substantiality, this ultimate essence as existing forever. And I think if we do get into that kind of thought, it really will do something to the mind and the way it perceives. In this final rule of magic, the fires which are considered are those of matter itself, which approach the shadow, and as the old commentary symbolically expresses it, rise up from the second darkness at the call of the Spirit of Light, and meet in their appointed place that which will absorb them and raise them to the fiery point from whence the fires of living light and radiant life have come. It's very beautiful, and it seems what we're speaking about here fires of matter, okay, which rise up from the second darkness, maybe the darkness of dense form, unprincipled form, systemically considered, unprincipled matter, at the call, the magnetic call of the Spirit of Light, which has been magically descending and meaning to mold this formless matter, and meet in their appointed place that which will absorb them. That's the sheath covered by the shadow, finally, and raise them to the fiery point from whence the fires of living light and radiant life have come. So this section of the old commentary is all about raising and redeeming the matter of the previous solar system. And I imagine that, there may be leftovers in the incarnations of any solar logos, and who knows about greater logoi, and the matter energy which vibrates to an earlier type of ray or pattern has to be reconditioned, transmuted, transformed, redeemed, brought into alignment with the pattern of the hour, which in our case is the second ray pattern. And in the process of redeeming the leftovers, there's much suffering involved. And here on our planet, I think we are the foremost redeeming agency planet in our solar system. It's really a reconditioning, a repatterning of the earlier interaction that characterized the previous major solar system. And maybe it always has to be done. Maybe there's always a kind of a residue or a left over, just as there is karma, the unfinished business of the past, as Dane Rudhyar refers to it. So we seem to be here on page 611, and if we were to look at where this all started, it started with the esoteric sense, from 601 to 611. And yeah, Well, this is going to take some time. I can see that. I'm sort of piling the commentaries on, and we just have to see whether this would be a good place, because we're just about at 3 hours, so this might be a good place to stop. And then find a way and a time to work it all out, because my converter has slowed down to a crawl. And normally I would be done with the conversion of the previous 3.5-hour program, and now here's another 3-hour program, but it's going so slowly. They put in some kind of codecs, not even sure what they are, but they put in these things that have to be stripped away, and it takes a long time to strip all that away. But we're about to begin something called The Nature of the Great Illusion. So we seem to be here on page, I think, 599, and this is 611, and that's the end of number 11, and we're starting number 12. Could that be correct? This is where I find myself oftentimes confused. We're at 611, and we have another 30 pages of text, and of document we have 25 pages. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. I just, when one is on a roll, one has to try to do these things if possible. And that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, well, we have now discussed the esoteric sense and the living of the subjective life, and we've discussed different degrees of subjectivity in the new group of world workers. Yeah, different degrees of subjectivity. The organized observers and the telepathic communicators, the sensitives, the communicators in the center, and then the hierarchy itself. And we find ourselves in one of those circles, or making a transition from one to another. It's very important that we determine where to work and how to work, where we stand, not for the sake of comparing ourselves to others, because we are those others. It sounds almost glib and platitudinous to say it, but the more you realize it, there's just no other being, despite the diversity which presents itself to our perception. So there really isn't any real competition, because we're already the wholeness of the universe and more, because, as I'm fond of saying, every universe being finite is an infinitesimal, and maybe all infinitesimals are the same infinitesimal. The ever lessening, the smaller and smaller. But there is something that is not the infinitesimal, and that is the absolute infinitude of the self-observation of the absolute post-universal deity, the absolute deity. And there's something that, is totally inexplicable, and it's absoluteness itself, which is utterly infinitely intense beingness. I don't know. Words are not going to do the job. But here we are in this variety, in this manyness, and we have to learn how in consciousness to convert the many to the one. It's already there. It's just not converted in our recognition this time. And we keep on repeating this, apparently, always with a new creative project, self-assigned to us, creativity within finitude, within finiteness, longing for the infinite, but never able to achieve it, except that is what we are. Well, we ultimately will see we have created a universe endlessly. There is no other being to become it. It's, as I say, not even so much creation. It's a question of self-becoming. And this has been going on forever, and as Aristotle said, infinity is untransversable. How do you get across it? You just can't. So how did we even arrive? That's a big mystery. How did we even arrive at the now unless we never left the now? These are philosophical considerations. Meanwhile, within the world of Maya, we have to handle the directives of ourselves as the universal maker of purpose. And we're all engaged in fulfilling our own plan. We cannot differentiate between God and ourselves. You'll be crucified for that one. But as DK talked about the Master Jesus overcoming the final synthetic illusion, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He realized he was God. So in that realization, the God of former times left. And for all of us, as we one day overcome the synthetic illusion, the conception of God as other will depart. It almost, sounds blasphemous to say these things. And we have trouble with blasphemy these days. People want to reinstitute those old laws based upon the limitations of the mind, but that really can't be allowed, So ever deeper, again and yet again and again and again, and yet there's been, in a way, no movement whatsoever. So just, reality is filled with what presents itself as paradox to the type of mind we have. All right, the next shot is going to be, this is the end of 15.1, and we're going to go into 15.2. And we'll deal with the negation of the great illusion. Well, okay, even that word illusion is problematic because there's the illusion which is simply based on incorrect interpretation by a very limited interpretive faculty, and then there's the illusion based upon any kind of finitude whatsoever. All finitude is illusory. Okay, that'll be it for the moment, and on we go when we'll take up program number 12. It's getting a little later here today. Let's see if there's any time for it. I would like there to be time. Just depends on the energy, Okay, thank you, everybody, and let's study hard and think deeply and use this wonderful foundational book, which is not only foundational, but which hints at so many things that are really beyond our present ken. But let's keep going deeper and deeper as we can. Okay, thank you, and see you soon. Bye.